The transfer portal continues to roll on. A couple of big names are very close to finding a home, one of which we thought might end up at Auburn, but quarterback Casey Thompson was at Texas a couple years ago, was at Nebraska last year, and now it looks like he may be headed to Florida Atlantic. And I think this is making all the sense in the world. When you look at the transfer portal and how it continues to turn, I think about the transfer portal in relation to quarterbacks like a game of musical chairs. Like, you got to find your chair before everybody else finds their chair, before that music stops, meaning there's no more chairs left. And for Casey Thompson, it looked like he maybe wanted the chair at Auburn. Payton Thorne ended up getting that chair. And as the music sort of starts to die down and gets a little bit softer, we're nearing closer and closer to summer ball, or summer camp rather, summer conditioning, and then fall camp where you actually start playing football. You got to find a spot. And remember who's at Florida Atlantic? His former head coach, Tom Herman. Remember, they were together at Texas, and even when Casey Thompson was starting under Steve Sarkisian, there were a lot of people with loud voices in the back row saying, yeah, but he's Tom Herman's guy. Yeah, he's a better fit with Tom Herman's system. Well, now, no more spring practice to be had. What better place to end up than at a place where you have your head coach you're familiar with, you already know the system, and you have 1 year left? New management at FAU with Tom Herman being a first-year head coach there? He's going to bring in people that he trusts. Casey Thompson's somebody you would imagine he trusts. Sounds like he may be taking a visit there here pretty soon. I 1,000,000% expect Casey Thompson to end up at FAU. We talked about it on a one-off video the other day, but for Casey Thompson, this is all about putting together the best resume for the National Football League. He's done the Power 5 thing. You can look at that tape if you want to. He's been dinged up throughout his career. But let's just say he goes to FAU and plays in the G5 and just puts up numbers. I think that's what this year is about for Casey Thompson. Being a big fish in a somewhat smaller pond. Good for Casey Thompson, and good for Tom Herman and FAU getting a Power 5 level quarterback his first year running the show there. So I think that's a fit, and again, I think that's going to happen. Make sure you subscribe right here to the On Three YouTube channel. We talk college football every single day. We appreciate y'all being tuned in. Also, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram at JD Pickell. Another big name that is on the move here is former Michigan State wide receiver Keon Coleman. Now, Keon Coleman took an official visit this past weekend to Florida State. Talked to people that have followed that recruitment closely. They feel like Florida State is in good position right now. I've said this before. If Keon Coleman goes to Florida State, you just got a couple of skyscrapers lined up out wide for the Noles. And Jordan Travis can just throw 50-50 ball after 50-50 ball and feel pretty good about his guys' chances to come down with it. Because you got Jaheim Bell playing tight end, who's about 6'3". You got another reserve tight end who's about 6'7". You got Johnny Wilson, who I always embellish his height every single time we talk about him just because it's fun to say. But really, he's like 6'7", okay? He's a wide receiver. He's 6'7". That's freakish. You got Keon Coleman, who's 6'3", can go up and get the rock like nobody's business. You can then play bully ball if you're Florida State on the outside. It's a very big deal. But also, it sounds like he's taken an official visit to Ole Miss here this week. Now, for Ole Miss, this would make a lot of sense for Keon Coleman because their top two receivers from a season ago have now gone to the league. So a whole lot of production that needs to be accounted for Ole Miss, and Keon Coleman trying to put together some solid tape for his draft stock to continue to improve. Also play in the SEC. There's no reservations about what you do if you are successful in that conference because you're playing against some of the top talent in the country and guys that will likely also end up being drafted soon. So that legitimizes your prospects even further. My one concern about Ole Miss is they're primarily a rushing offense if they stick true to what they did a season ago. I'm just curious to see how that plays out, how that factors in. I mean, it was the academies and then Ole Miss in terms of how frequently they ran the football. So it's not necessarily an aired out kind of offense like you might see at Florida State, but you would definitely get the lion's share of the targets and receptions if you're Keon Coleman. So keep an eye on that. Here's what I would say about Keon Coleman. I don't think this is the last visit we're going to see from him. Conventional wisdom would tell you if it is NIL fueled, and again, I believe it is. I have no reason to believe it's not. If NIL is a big part of Keon Coleman's recruitment, rather, then you would expect to at least, play the field a little bit. Kind of see what else is out there. Maybe see who else is in the Keon Coleman sweepstakes. So we'll leave it at that. I think there's more visits on the way for Keon Coleman, but visited Florida State. is visiting Ole Miss. Makes all the sense to be at both those places in terms of Keon Coleman getting some production and improving his draft stock. So, Keon Coleman's teammate, Payton Thorne, former Michigan State quarterback, found his home with the Auburn Tigers. We're going to break this down a little bit more in depth a little bit later in the show. But the biggest thing for me with Payton Thorne and Auburn, the marriage makes sense because it gives Auburn direction. Robbie Ashford, I love Robbie Ashford. I love his response to Payton Thorne transferring in and him tweeting out like, hey, iron sharpens iron, let's work, War Eagle, I'm here. And also Robbie Ashford not transferring out before Payton Thorne got there, when everybody and their mother knew that somebody was probably transferring in to Auburn to be a quarterback there. But going back to Payton Thorne, quick processor, good leader, a lot of experience. You just get some steady hands on the wheel for Auburn. And for Payton Thorne, gets a chance to be, in my opinion, a more quarterback-friendly offense than what he was at Michigan State. This is a great fit. It gives Auburn direction. It helps Payton Thorne's career. I think we'll see him play better football, like I've already told you before, than what we saw from him at Michigan State, just by nature of the system. Now, one name that's kind of sneaky that jumped in the portal and that's also headed to Auburn is former Ohio State wide receiver Caleb Burton. Now, Caleb Burton was a four-star guy in the 2022 cycle. And I'll just say this about Caleb Burton or any Ohio State wide receiver that does end up hitting the portal at any point in time. Just because you weren't the guy as a freshman at Ohio State doesn't mean you can't ball. Caleb Burton, about 5'11", 170 pounds. If you were good enough to go to Ohio State, you're good enough to make some noise other places. I mean, it's a crowded wide receiver room. We all know that. So the opportunity for him, I think, is to step into a place at Auburn that doesn't have a ton of options in that wide receiver room, especially at the slot position with Tavares Dawson hitting the portal. Caleb Burton, I think, could help Auburn this year. I don't think you got to wait around and develop him and find a role for him. Like, I think he's a guy that can help you in 2023. Really technical route runner. Again, I think he fits in the slot. I keep going back to this. Just because you didn't play at Ohio State doesn't mean you can't ball. The most extreme example of that is Jameson Williams. He's in the league now. Did his thing at Alabama for 1 year. So keep an eye on Caleb Burton. I'm not saying he's Jameson Williams, but I am saying that's a big pickup, a sneaky big pickup for the Auburn Tigers. We'll stay in that slot wide receiver position. We'll talk about MYCAH Pittman, who was at Florida State and surprised a lot of people when he announced he was jumping into the portal. Because remember, MYCAH Pittman, one of the most productive wide receivers on that roster in 2021, did a lot of good things for that team. In 2022, rather, was really productive. 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, 32 catches. He was a contributor in a very real way for them. Got hip surgery over the offseason, it sounds like. You hope he's able to be healthy by the time fall gets rolling here. It sounds like he will be. He's gritty, man. I really like the fit here for Utah. Ends up going to Utah. I should have probably said that at the jump. MYCAH Pittman's transferring to Utah, and he's going to be a good fit there. Going back to the West Coast. He's from California, played his high school ball in Calabasas. Gritty wide receiver, going to fit in the slot. There's some production now to be made up for at Utah. I mean, Dalton Kincaid is going to Nick Brake's Buffalo Bills, was a first-round pick. So he's not the same kind of player as Dalton Kincaid, obviously, with Dalton Kincaid being, that big target for you. He's a mismatch problem, but still a guy that plays in the slot, a guy that's going to have to make up for some production that was lost, and another weapon for Cam Rising as Utah, one of those teams, man, it feels like every offseason they're not the big brand like USC is. They don't have the same shine as some of those other Pac-12 schools do, like an Oregon or a Washington. But listen, man, Utah's the back-to-back Pac-12 champs in convincing fashion, and they bring back their quarterback. So another weapon for him. Again, MYCAH Pittman is headed to Salt Lake to be a Ute. Last one I want to talk about here, Tre'Quon Fagans. Cornerback, was formerly at Alabama, a 4-star guy in the 2022 cycle, is headed to USC. And I have a similar policy that I talk about with Caleb Burton at Ohio State and Ohio State wide receivers as I do defensive backs at Alabama and Georgia. If you're good enough to go play corner for Nick Saban, if he wants you on his team to be a defensive back, you're good enough for me, man. You're good enough to come play on my team. Because I'll tell you what, Nick Saban, the defensive back room, those are his babies now. Like, he takes extra pride in what that secondary does. And Tre'Quon Fagans, a guy who is verified at us here at On 3 at the high school level with 6 foot. Now you go look at Alabama, and his roster height has him at 6'2". So there's a lot of jokes to be had about what Alabama was doing for their roster heights and measurements, but whatever it ends up being, either way you slice it, he's a 6-foot-plus corner, fits really well in modern college football, the way that you got to match up with these big wide receivers. And regardless of how tall you want to say he is, he's a fit for this defense. And you're going to play against really good quarterbacks for USC. I mean, you look at the schedule. Sam Hartman from Notre Dame, Bo Nix at Oregon, Michael Penix Jr. from Washington. Like, the work is cut out for you if you're a secondary player at USC. So you add some more talent, add a guy who's seen some things in the SEC. I know he's young, but I really like that get for Lincoln Riley. And anytime you get somebody from Saban's roster, I think that's addition by addition. So a lot of big names on the move, a lot of big names close to finding a home. We'll keep an eye on Casey Thompson and Keon Coleman's recruitment. But a lot of schools getting rich through the portal right now. And all your names are now in there outside of grad transfers. So we'll keep an eye on some of these guys as they get closer to finding a home. But a lot of these big-time names are going to make some noise at new destinations in 2023.
Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.